I'm Leanne Mcadoo with the InfoWars Nightly News. The FDA and their loyal lobbying minions have no problem misleading the public when it comes to the health dangers of genetically modified foods. Now, with the recent passing of the so-called Monsanto Protection Act, is there anything that we can do to stop the demise of our food supply at the hands of biotech companies? Today, I'm going to be speaking with author and documentarian Jeffrey Smith, who is the executive director for the Institute for Responsible Technology. His latest documentary, Genetic Roulette, warns of the health dangers of genetically modified organisms. So thank you for being with us today, Jeffrey Smith. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Wonderful. So now, why are we taking the gamble of our lives by consuming GMOs?
Well, don't ask me, ask Monsanto. I mean, it ultimately comes down to political corruption, industry manipulation, collusion. And we can go back even to 1992 when the first Bush administration declared that GMOs were safe and that they weren't going to regulate it. Dan Quayle made a big announcement in the White House Indian Treaty Room. 2 days later, the much heralded FDA policy on GMOs came out saying, we don't see any difference, therefore no testing is necessary. Companies like Monsanto could determine on their own if GMOs are safe and put it on the market without telling the FDA or consumers. Monsanto told us that Agent Orange, PCBs, and DDT were safe. Well, the person in charge of that policy at the FDA was Monsanto's former attorney, Michael Taylor, later Monsanto's vice president and chief lobbyist, now back at the FDA as the U.S. food safety czar. So we didn't take the risk. We didn't put our lives at risk. It was Michael Taylor and his policy overruled or overlooked the concerns by the scientists at the FDA, which were very clearly explained in memo after memo made public from a lawsuit, saying that GMOs were not only different, but dangerous. And they urged their superiors to require long-term testing, but were ignored. So we have been thrust into this unprecedented gamble where everything that we eat and all future generations are put at risk by this infant technology, genetic engineering.
But I thought it was, they just wanted to feed the world with this technology. Obviously, that's not, that's just the tip of it, I guess.
Well, actually, it's not even the tip of it. It's a lie. The overwhelming consensus among the experts at feeding the world is that GMOs have nothing to offer in their current state. In fact, the huge ISTAD report signed on by 58 countries, sponsored by the UN and the World Health Organization and WTO, basically said that GMOs are not in the picture in terms of feeding the world, eradicating poverty, or creating sustainable agriculture. In fact, genetically engineered crops on average reduce yield and increase the use of agricultural chemicals and concentrate the ownership of agriculture and are unsafe.
Right, and so now researchers are basically kind of crossbreeding these organisms that are not meant to be compatible. How are scientists getting around the natural barriers to create these bizarre species?
Well, they are bizarre. In fact, they've taken genes from spiders, inserted them into goats in the hopes that they could milk the goat to get spiderweb protein to make bulletproof vests. I'm not making this up. They've put jellyfish genes into kittens so that they glow in the dark. They've put human genes into corn to make spermicide. And the way they do it is they avoid completely the normal crossing of sexual reproduction. And so let's say you want to take a corn plant and make it into a registered pesticide, and millions of acres in the U.S. are, in fact, registered pesticide corn plants. You take a gene from soil bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. You make millions of copies of that gene that produces a toxin that breaks open the stomach of insects to kill them. You put it into a gun and shoot that gun into a plate of millions of cells and then clone those cells into a plant. And now every one of the cells of these genetically engineered BT corn plants has a little gene-sized spray bottle which creates a toxin that breaks open the stomach of insects to kill them. And it's in our food supply, and it's in the food supply of our children, and it's in the blood of pregnant women now, and it's in the blood of unborn fetuses. And the most recent studies have shown that it does, in fact, interact with human cells. It pokes holes in human cells just in the way that it kills insects. And in a study came out this week it turns out it is cytotoxic. It causes problems in the blood of mice as well. So the Environmental Protection Agency, which registers these crops as pesticides, assured us that the Bt toxin had no impact on humans or mammals, ignored their own scientific advisory panel, and put it on the market without requiring any testing. Now, numerous doctors, thousands of them, which prescribe non-GMO diets, many of them believe that this Bt toxin in our corn may be related to massive gastrointestinal disorders, as well as leaky gut, which is linked to many other diseases.
So is the Bt corn, is that the only sort of cross-species trait in our food, or are there other traits in other foods? What else is out there?
The main crop that's genetically engineered is called herbicide tolerance. So Monsanto scientists found bacteria surviving in a chemical waste dump in the vicinity of Roundup herbicide. Roundup is an antibiotic. It normally kills bacteria, but this bacteria was surviving. So Monsanto scientists figured, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene that allowed the bacterium to survive and put it into soybeans. So now you can spray the field of soybeans with Roundup herbicide, and it won't kill the soybeans that are genetically engineered as Roundup ready. Now what happens is the Roundup ready soy and corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, and alfalfa drink the Roundup, and they store a portion of it in the food that we eat. Roundup is not the benign herbicide that Monsanto wanted us to believe. And it turns out, a study came out last week by two very top scientists, one at MIT. I spent a long time interviewing her, and the glyphosate, or active ingredient in Roundup, is linked to essentially every major Western disease on the rise due to diet. So from cancer, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, anxiety, aggression, anorexia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, it's very, very dangerous. And it is unfortunately in high concentrations of these Roundup ready crops, which is the vast majority of all GMOs that we eat.
Right, and genetic roulette actually touches on the majority of the soy in Similac and baby formula is GMO, so our children are being used as lab rats, basically. So what are doctors saying about the effects of these GMOs in baby formula?
Well, in the film Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, Michelle Perro, who is an award-winning pediatrician, she was rated as one of the top 10 pediatricians in the United States for many, many years. She said basically she's seeing very complicated diseases related to lack of ability of digestion among her patients, and that this in the last few years it's been an overwhelming number where kids are unable to thrive, meaning they're not gaining any weight, or they're allergic to every category of food, or they're constantly crying. And when she was reviewing my book, Genetic Roulette, and saw the disrupted architecture of the cell walls along the intestines and stomach of rats that were fed genetically modified foods, she said to herself, uh-oh, we've got a problem, because this is the kind of disruption in the internal cellular architecture that she is sure she is seeing in the children that she's treating. So she and numerous other people believe that these genetically engineered crops are wreaking havoc with the health of this coming generation. And that right now, of course, we know that children are most at risk from the potential dangers of GMOs. They're more allergenic. They can get allergies more easily. They're more susceptible to toxins. The foods that are being served to them are incorporated into the very structures of these growing organs and tissues. And so we believe that what we're seeing now in terms of ADHD and autism and diabetes and all these things and obesity are related to GMOs. Now, I was speaking at MIT a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the audience, okay, who in the audience has switched to a non-GMO diet and noticed a benefit? So one woman immediately raised her hand and described her son, who I believe was about 6.5, and he was very aggressive, completely out of control, and they wanted to call him retarded and take him out of school and put him in a special school. Then she saw the film, Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, heard parents of autistic kids describing how their kids got better, both behaviorally and gastrointestinally, how mothers and doctors took patients off of GMOs and their symptoms got better. She immediately eliminated all GMOs from her son's diet and said now she has a completely new son. No problems with aggression. No one out of control. The whole concept of him being retarded was eliminated. He's completely assimilated into his classroom. She says she has a completely new son. And the only thing she did was change his diet. Now multiply this by millions of people who are feeding their kids, starting with infant formula, genetically engineered soy in the infant formula, bovine growth hormone, which is injected into cows to increase milk supply in the milk infant formulas. It's so dangerous that 3 Monsanto scientists who are studying the milk from cows treated with their genetically engineered drug found so much cancer-promoting hormone in the milk from treated cows, the 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. And yet our entire generation is being fed this milk from cows treated with bovine growth hormone.
That's unbelievable. So how are firms like Monsanto, how are they getting around sort of testing and then sharing the results of those tests with the public?
Well, first of all, the Food and Drug Administration, because it was hijacked by Monsanto and its former attorney, Michael Taylor, does not require a single safety study on GMOs. Now, the FDA is unlike other countries or other regulators where they do require some studies, but it's always extremely superficial. And we have caught Monsanto and other biotech companies red-handed rigging their research with tobacco science. In other words, is specifically designing the research to avoid finding problems. Even doing so, they find serious health problems, which they then dismiss using unscientific excuses. Now, they also limit the ability of other scientists independently to do research. So they patent their own genetically modified seeds and crops, making them unavailable to do any research. So if anyone wants to do research, they go to the companies and ask for permission, they're turned down. Then if someone does figure out a way to smuggle some seeds and do research, then they're attacked. They oftentimes lose their job or are stripped of responsibilities or lose their funding, denied tenure, etc. And this attack has made it so risky for people to do research in GMOs that hundreds of them refuse to do any research because they don't want to withstand those threats to themselves and to their families. And if they do the research, it's often very difficult to publish. And if they do publish it, very often Monsanto or others will rush to publication a counter study, clearly rigged to avoid finding problems, clearly rigged to create the opposite effect, so they can say, well, it's just a question of which study you're looking at. And that's how they keep it out of the limelight. Most recently, a study was released on September 19th showing that they fed rats Monsanto's genetically modified Roundup Ready corn for 2 years. Now, Monsanto only does 90-day feeding studies, and during the first 90 days of this 2-year study, the next month they started developing tumors, and they grew so fast and so profoundly that up to 80% of the female rats had tumors, mostly of the mammary glands. Up to 50% of the male rats, they also had early death and organ damage. Well, as soon as this came out, the biotech industry jumped all over the study with unscientific claims, pretending that it wasn't an appropriate study, that had been discredited. And so they gave the same talking points from all over the world, so everyone could basically refer to the other pro-biotech apologists as verifying their own position, so that they could say there is now a consensus all over the planet that it's discredited information and shouldn't be focused on. That was just the chorus of the biotech people working for Monsanto directly or indirectly that were causing that hysteria.
That is unbelievable. So what are two of the scariest things about consuming these genetically modified organisms?
Well, one is if you are of childbearing age, there's a lot to be concerned about. We know that mice, rats, and hamsters that were fed genetically engineered Roundup-ready crops had damage to their testicles, uterus, ovaries. The DNA functioned differently in the embryo offspring when the parent mice were fed GM soy compared to non-GM soy. Female rats were fed genetically modified soy starting 2 weeks before they got pregnant. More than half of their babies died within 3 weeks compared to only 10% death rate among controls. Hamsters fed GM soy by the third generation had smaller babies, fewer babies, sterile babies, and some had hair growing in their mouths. Mice fed GM corn had smaller babies and fewer babies. It meant very, very serious problems for the next generation. But if you're not focused on the children, people find one of the scariest aspects as a result of the only human feeding study that has been published of late. And that showed that genes inserted into soybeans to make the soybeans Roundup ready actually transferred into the DNA of the bacteria living inside our intestines. That means that even after we stop eating GMOs, we have the DNA embedded living inside us. And in this case, in this particular study, the gut bacteria that had incorporated the DNA of the Roundup ready soy was in itself Roundup ready. It was unkillable with Roundup, suggesting that this transferred gene inside our gut bacteria was continually producing genetically modified proteins. Now, here's where it gets really scary. We know that corn chips are made from Bt corn that produces a Bt toxin that can poke holes in human cells and in insect cells, that can cause disruption, that can hurt red blood cells in mice, that can maybe be linked to inflammatory bowel, leaky gut, etc. It was found, the Bt toxin was found in 93% of pregnant women tested. How come so many pregnant women had Bt toxin in their blood when Bt toxin should wash out quickly? This was done in Canada, not in Mexico, where they eat corn tortillas every day. So the authors suggested that the source of the Bt toxin was eating the milk and meat of animals that fed on the corn. So they were thinking that you can get the Bt toxin just from eating the milk and meat. But I think a more plausible explanation, and here's where the scary part comes in. Imagine if you eat a corn chip with Bt toxin producing genes, and the gene that produces that toxin transfers to your gut bacteria and continues to function, converting it into living pesticide factories. That means that you have a toxin, which is a known allergen and a toxin which pokes holes in human cells, being produced continuously inside your own digestive tract. This might explain why inflammatory bowel disease is up 40% since GMOs were introduced, or why leaky gut has been on the rise, and that's linked to autism and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cancer and autoimmune disease and inflammation. Or it could be Crohn's disease or irritable bowel, or all these things that may be related to Bt toxin, and that toxin may be produced continuously inside our own digestive tract. So when I tell people that, that is really cause for concern. But we do know the good news is this, that the thousands of doctors prescribing non-GMO diets, the veterinarians and farmers who take the livestock off of GMOs, the humans and animals are getting better. So we don't know, we're not monitoring the gut bacteria to know what changes are, but we do know that animals are getting better, and sometimes within 2 or 3 days. So that's the good news.
Yeah, well, at least there is some good news.
Yes.
So is there a way that people can actually and easily avoid these GMOs?
Yes, well, we have a website, nongmoshoppingguide.com, and an iPhone application that's free called Shop No GMO. So nongmoshoppingguide.com and Shop No GMO iPhone application. There's about 10,000 products that are third-party verified as non-GMO listed in the shopping guide. You can also buy products that are organic. They're not allowed to intentionally use GMOs. You can buy products that say non-GMO right on the label, especially non-GMO Project verified. And we also have a list of hidden ingredients, the invisible ingredients, where you don't necessarily see corn or soy, but you may see dextrose or maltodextrin. So we have a list of the 9 genetically modified food crops and their derivatives in the shopping guide, so you can go around the store, look at the products that you're going to buy, and see if it contains any of these derivatives of GMOs. The good news is in the produce section, you only have 4 to be concerned about. zucchini, yellow crookneck squash, corn, and papaya from Hawaii or China. These are 4 of the GM crops. The others are soy, cottonseed oil, canola oil, sugar from sugar beets, as well as alfalfa used as hay. These are the only 9 genetically modified food crops, and there are ways to avoid them. Now, we think that when about 5% of U.S. shoppers avoid brands that contain GM ingredients, that would be sufficient to create a tipping point of consumer rejection, turning GMOs into a marketing liability and forcing the companies to abandon GM ingredients. This is how GMOs were kicked out of Europe back in 1999. It was based on a high-profile food scandal where a scientist was ungagged and could finally talk about the dangers of GMOs. In Europe, over 700 articles were written within a single month in England alone, and that was enough to create a tipping point. But the mainstream media ignored the entire incident in the United States, and so the same companies that removed GMOs in Europe continue to sell us GMOs in the U.S. But we now see early signs of a tipping point, huge popularity among products labeled non-GMO, huge eruption of people wanting labeling and demanding non-GMO alternatives. So we think a tipping point is on its way. And you can learn more about the tipping point and how to become involved at responsibletechnology.org, which is at the Institute for Responsible Technology, responsibletechnology.org, where we can give free newsletters and free online audios and videos and other materials to keep everyone informed and active on this issue.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for all the information and for all that you're doing to inform the public about the dangers of GMOs and really giving us the tools to kind of stop it. And if it only takes 5% of us to get these out of our food supply, I don't think that that's too far off then.
I agree. I think we're going to be seeing some very good news very soon.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
You're most welcome.
We'll talk to you soon. Now, you can pick up a copy of Genetic Roulette. Both the book and DVD are at our InfoWars store. That's at InfoWarsStore.com. Join us again here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central. I'm Leanne Mcadoo for the InfoWars Nightly News.
Many anthropologists and archaeologists believe that before man even discovered the power to harness and use fire, we were involved in agrarian activities. That is, taking the seeds of plants and then replanting them to produce more. The very foundation of our modern civilization and human culture is centered around the planting and cultivation of edible plants, fruits, vegetables, nuts, you name it. And the globalists have been going after gardening. They've been harassing people that have gardens in their front yards or their backyards. They've called for licenses for people to have gardens because you can't trust prisoners in the police state America to be able to grow their own food. That's why I've come to the realization that we need to become self-sufficient. You need to be informed. You need to have the Second Amendment to protect yourself. You need to be politically active to wake up others. You need to filter your water. But you also need to plant a garden. Even if you live in an apartment, you can do this. If you live in the countryside, obviously you can do it on a grand scale. There are so many green belts and areas that humans don't even visit, nearby cities and in suburbs, where people are now more and more planting their own little private gardens and meadows and off the side of the road. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a revolutionary act to unplug from the television, to unplug from the computer and all the globalist propaganda, and to go out in your backyard or your front yard or planters at your apartment or on the roof of the building where you live, and to plant a garden.
Here are some of the amazing deals at InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com. The Survival Seed Vault by My Patriot Supply features only the finest survival heirloom seeds for a robust and hardy garden, even in the toughest of times. The ARC All-in-One Seed Kit contains 70 varieties of 50,000 seeds of fruits, vegetables, medicinal, and culinary herbs. All ARC seeds are heirloom. Each type is labeled and sealed separately for ease of use and longevity. The Deluxe Emergency Seed Bank combines 3 of Emergency Seed Bank's top sellers: the Family Survival Emergency Seed Bank, the medicinal herb seeds pack, and the culinary herb seeds pack. We also have starter varieties of the deluxe seed packages for fruit, salad, salsa, peppers, and medicinal herbs and more. Go to the InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com.
A little seed can grow a huge tree that produces fruit for up to 50 years. We have the best life bombs. That's what these are. We have the best weapons against death out there at the lowest prices, waiting for you to lovingly plant them and lovingly grow them and lovingly eat them and share them with others. We will strike back against the New World Order, and this is only one more initiative in our fight against them. So please join us at InfoWarsShop.com, or you can link through at Infowars.com at the InfoWars Seed Center.
I'm Mcadoo with the InfoWars Nightly News. The FDA and their loyal lobbying minions have no problem misleading the public when it comes to the health dangers of genetically modified foods. Now, with the recent passing of the so-called Monsanto Protection Act, is there anything that we can do to stop the demise of our food supply at the hands of biotech companies? Today, I'm going to be speaking with author and documentarian Jeffrey Smith, who is the
consensus among the experts at feeding the world is that GMOs have nothing to offer in their current state. In fact, the huge ISTAD report signed on by 58 countries, sponsored by the UN and the World Health Organization and WTO, basically said that GMOs are not in the picture in terms of feeding the world, eradicating poverty, or creating sustainable agriculture. In fact, genetically engineered crops on average reduce yield and increase the use of agricultural chemicals and concentrate the ownership of agriculture and are unsafe.
Right, and so now researchers are basically kind of cross-breeding these organisms that are not meant to be compatible. How are scientists getting executive director for the Institute for Responsible Technology? His latest documentary, Genetic Roulette, warns of the health dangers of genetically modified organisms. So thank you for being with us today, Jeffrey Smith. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Wonderful. So now, why are we taking the gamble of our lives by consuming GMOs?
Well, don't ask me, ask Monsanto. I mean, it ultimately comes down to political corruption, industry manipulation, collusion. And we can go back even to 1992 when the first Bush administration declared that GMOs were at risk. It was Michael Taylor and his policy overruled or overlooked the concerns by the scientists at the FDA, which were very clearly explained in memo after memo made public from a lawsuit, saying that GMOs were not only different, but dangerous. And they urged their superiors to require long-term testing, but were ignored. So we have been thrust into this unprecedented gamble where everything that we eat and all future generations are put at risk by this infant technology, genetic engineering.
But I thought it was, you know, they just wanted to feed the world with this technology. Obviously, that's not, that's just the tip of it, I guess.
Well, actually, it's not even the tip of it. It's a lie. The overwhelming consensus safe and that they weren't going to regulate it. Dan Quayle made a big announcement in the White House Indian Treaty Room. 2 days later, the much heralded FDA policy on GMOs came out saying, we don't see any difference, therefore no testing is necessary. Companies like Monsanto could determine on their own if GMOs are safe and put it on the market without telling the FDA or consumers. Monsanto told us that Agent Orange, PCBs, and DDT were safe. Well, the person in charge of that policy at the FDA was Monsanto's former attorney, Michael Taylor, later Monsanto's vice president and chief lobbyist, now back at the FDA as the U.S. food safety czar. So we didn't take the risk. We didn't put our lives